created very many openings, very many new vulnerabilities for um, hackers to kind of cling on. And just cyber threats related to coronavirus in the last 2 months have gone up by about 600%, just related to coronavirus. Using the topic of coronavirus, hackers are trying to uh, uh, cheat you, deceive you, get hold of information, and so on. Now, I might not actually, I'm not a believer that this will actually come true, but then one has to be prepared for the worst. So it's always better that you are prepared and you know what's happening. But to understand any subject in some way, you need to kind of go back a little in history, and history kind of then helps you understand the subject and the context of how things evolved and how things developed. So I'm going to go back a little in history, and it starts with a program written by a gentleman called Bob Thomas. He wrote a program called Creeper, and the purpose of the Creeper was that it should travel from one computer to other. A very simple objective, nowhere near what we do today, but that was the state of the art at that time in 1971. Then a gentleman called Ray Tomlinson. Ray Tomlinson, you might have heard of him. He's the guy who invented email. And Ray Tomlinson actually looked at Creeper, the program, and he said that, look, if I can take this program and do something with it, uh, I can probably, make this work in a very different way. So he took the Creeper program and then made it self-replicating. So that actually became the birth of the first virus. Today we are all scared of the coronavirus because it's self-replicating. It just keeps replicating all the time. So truly in 1972, uh, Ray Tomlinson did this, and he didn't know that where it was going, but definitely he didn't think about any malicious use of it. But today, if you see the kind of malware that you see, you have backdoors, dialers, hijackers, viruses, worms, spyware, keyloggers, all sorts of malware is available today. So that's where it started, and that's where it evolved to now. And if you still go back in history and see from 1986, when the IBM PC came, there was a virus called In the Wild, and then there was a virus called Brain. In 1987, they say that the first antivirus was born, which could actually catch and destroy a virus. But you can see how things were primitive, and they look really primitive today. That in 1989, the first Trojan virus was actually a floppy-based one. So you had to actually take the floppy and insert it into your computer, and then it would get infected. But in a way, I think 1998 was a turning point when Windows 98 came in, and then security became mainstream. The users expanded, and then the whole internet exploded. So security became a major concern and went mainstream. In 2000, there was a virus called I Love You. It just infected millions of computers all over the world. In 2002, the Department of Homeland Security in the US, we follow the US in cybersecurity because US is a very powerful country in terms of cyber power, both in terms of being able to deal with technology and emerging technologies from a technology standpoint. And also it is the most attacked country in the world. So therefore, the steps that they have taken, many countries seem to have followed those steps sooner or later. In 2003, a activist group called Anonymous was started, and it was truly anonymous. People from various countries who were unnamed actually, uh, came and carried out some hacking exploits. And in 2006, there was a kind of tipping point when the whole Snowden thing happened, and Snowden made public 10 million documents which he had stolen from the National Security Agency of the US. And then the Panama Papers happened, and so on and so forth. So since then, we have been dealing with security headlines very often. Many cyber incidents, cyber attacks have become high profile. But let's see what is driving these. What are the key drivers of cyber risk? If we look at it, we are in an increasing digitized world, and some people say that the coronavirus will move us much faster into the use of more digital technology. People are already talking about contactless solutions and contactless cards for one, and all sorts of other contactless solutions which are digital payment systems and so on. So we are going into an increasingly digital world, and we are kind of on the cusp of building a very large digital society. The second is that the pace of innovation, that companies today, if they want to innovate and be competitive and lead from the front in their industries, then they have to use a lot of information technology. Without the use of internet information technology, I think they will hardly make much headway in becoming a business leader or a brand leader. But the pace of innovation that's happening, companies are not able to keep pace with the kind of technologies that are coming in, to ingest them, to use them, to make them operational in their companies, and then to devise defenses around these things. The technological complexity is also increased. Earlier, as they say, cybersecurity was only a castle and moat kind of situation. You build some trenches around your fort and fortify your defenses, and you're there. But if you see technology today, it's kind of changed very rapidly. Today, you use cloud, you use your mobile phone, you use laptops, you use virtual private networks, you use Wi-Fi networks, you use various kinds of devices today which are connected to the internet. So therefore, the technological complexity has increased substantially, and security has therefore very different connotation or context today than it had a few years ago. If you look at data sharing and interchange, perhaps never been more significant than today. You just stream a movie in a matter of seconds on your mobile or anything, and you transfer large files today on the internet. This was just not possible earlier. The hackers have also got much smarter. The sophistication of the kind of attacks that they're able to perpetrate, the kind of technology that they are using today, and how they are organized, again makes it big imperative that cyber risk is growing by the day. If we look at the drivers of cyber security, purely in terms of a warfare perspective, there are 33 countries today who have cyber attack capabilities as countries, not as so. And this was just about 14 countries had cyber attack capabilities in 2012. So countries are also using cyberspace as one of their theaters of war, as they call it. Apart from land, sea, air, and space, now they say the fifth is cyberspace. The second is, I think, the growth of the internet economy, the growth of e-commerce, the growth of Internet of Things. Cybercrime has become big business. Laws and regulations have come up everywhere regarding data and its use and its storage. The rise of social media and the access that hackers have today to a variety of tools. So therefore, there are many reasons that cybersecurity, many drivers of cybersecurity today. And perhaps the most important, they say, is that cybercrime is the perfect crime. It's low cost, it's hard to detect, it gives you the anonymity that you want, and then it gives you big profits. So it's really a great ground for criminals to play on. Let's look at cyber security today in 2020. What are the things that we need to be concerned about as we stand in 2020 today? There were about 2 billion devices or objects connected to the internet in 2006. Now, this is going to increase to about 200 billion by 2023. So that's a 100-time increase in, let's say, about 17 years. So that's a huge jump. The global cybercrime damages are about $6 trillion. So that's a lot of money. Cumulative spending on IT security is also set to go past $1 trillion. So people are taking it seriously and putting serious money behind the problem. The digital attack surface, if you see, the World Wide Web was invented sometime in 89 or 90, and The first, what we call websites today, went live in 1991. Today there are close to 2 billion websites. So that's the expansion you've seen. There are currently maybe about 5 billion internet users in the world. The whole world population is about 7.7 billion. And out of that, 5 billion is already connected to the internet, either through phone or laptop or any other device means or something. And therefore, if you look at all these, that cyber criminal activity is going to be one of the biggest challenges, not only businesses, but even humanity as a whole will face in the next 2 decades. And cyber attacks are the fastest growing crime globally, and they are increasing in size, scale, sophistication, and cost. So how does this all impact a business? Why should we be concerned? How does it impact a business? So if a business is hacked, what could happen? So let's look at some of the things that could happen to a business, some of the consequences of a data breach, of a successful cyber attack. The first is loss of revenue. Loss of customers, loss of revenue, all of this is something that customers can't afford, because if things come to a standstill like they have today because of a different virus, there is loss of revenue for every company. So if your internal operating systems and your IT systems are locked up, you're going to have loss of revenue. Damage to reputation, certainly, because your customers depend on you, and if for any reason you're not able to deliver the kind of services that they expect, then your reputation is bound to be affected. One of the biggest areas is intellectual property, which hackers seek to take from you. And intellectual property has a lot of value in today's world. There were already allegations between China and the US of stealing, the vaccine information that each other had or were developing. So intellectual property makes a lot of difference in the business world today, and it's a very important thing that companies need to safeguard, and something that hackers are looking for all the time. Then there is simple vandalism. People can deface your website, write messages, and so on. Not that harmful, but yes, harmful in its own way. And all this will lead to a cost. There'll be a direct cost, and then there'll be a hidden cost of. And at worst, what can happen is that all these things can happen together to a company. So if you have loss of revenue, reputation gets damaged, and you lose intellectual property, and you're vandalized, and you have to face, all this can happen. So as somebody said, it takes 20 years plus to make a reputation, but a few minutes of a cyber attack can ruin the reputation. So there are some major cyber attacks, some major companies here who have suffered cyber attacks, and the idea of showing you this is that nobody is immune, nobody is totally secure in this game. There are large companies which have probably done a few things right for cybersecurity, but still they face the challenge of cyber threats and cyber attacks, and they're exposed to cyber risks. So we will take some of these cases and look at them to try and understand. The idea is, these high-profile attacks make you sit up and take notice. You immediately say that, oh, it's happened to these people, could happen to my business tomorrow. So, but let's look at some of these case studies, because these case studies each highlight the modus operandi of a hacker, the mindset of a hacker, and what these companies did right or wrong to actually in securing them, and what were the consequences that they had to face. So let's look at the first one. You must have heard of Maersk. Maersk is one of the largest, or perhaps the largest, shipping company in the world. It does container shipping, and it also owns ports and terminals. They have about 130 offices across the world, about 88,000 employees, and it's a company which is about a $35 billion company. Now, a company as large as this, you would imagine they are well sorted, they're well taken care of, but a small malware malicious piece of software called NotPetya, which is actually a ransomware, uh, happened to completely bring their operations to a standstill. Now, what happened? It infected 45,000 PCs, about 4,000 servers, and it started because one employee in Ukraine just clicked on an email which he shouldn't have, and that got the malware into the system and spread. So if you can see on top, humans trust even when they shouldn't, and that this is a normal thing that happens to human beings, that they click before they think, and that's what happened in Maersk. But Maersk actually handles 15% of the whole cargo movement in the world through containers, and you can imagine what that attack did. And all their terminals, everything was without IT for 15 to 20 days before they recovered. And they say losses crossed more than $300 million. Just one click, and that's what happened. Facebook, a lot of you may be on Facebook. Facebook has strong security systems, though there have been issues with Facebook in the past. It's one of the big four, considered along with Amazon, Apple, and Google. And what happened was 50 million accounts got exposed to hackers, and they had access to it for an extended period of time, which Facebook doesn't say how long, but for a fair amount of time. And you can see how it happened. It happened through a very simple feature that Facebook allows, that when you create your profile, you have a facility called View As. So you can use that View As facility and you view your own profile and see how it appears to others. On the face of it, a very small uh, and probably a good feature. The point is that the hackers used this feature and then broke into the system, and in spite of all Facebook's defenses, managed to actually get through. And they had access to so much data that we all put on Facebook without thinking twice. The third case I talk about is Aramco. This happened in 2012. Now, Shamoon is a virus which is a very deadly virus, and Saudi Aramco, as a lot of you may know, is the national petroleum and natural gas company of Saudi Arabia. It is one of the largest companies in the world by in terms of revenue, and they say it's the most profitable company in the world. So it was a prime target, and they pump in about 9.5 billion barrels of oil every day. And again, here, what happened was that people were on holiday for Ramzan and there were very few employees around. And suddenly they got this message that their computers have been hacked, and they could not access data. The Shamoon virus actually works by writing on a master boot record. So once a master boot record in a disk is corrupted, there is then no way to access, because it has the file access table. It's called the FAT. And then if that is, then the pointers to the data are gone. So again, it created huge damage. 30,000 workstations, disks had to be changed, and Aramco actually went into the market and bought 30,000 new disk drives, which created a price increase for disk drives because such a sudden demand came in. And then they changed all they had to change all the disks and get their things running. Fortunately, their networks were segmented. It didn't affect oil production, but it did affect the fact that they had to go back to a paper-based environment where they had to where they had to manage all their supplies on paper. They had to use faxes. So it was like going back several years, and it's very difficult to go back once you're used to the benefits of an IT system. It's very hard to get back into a manual mode of operation and work. Yahoo, another famous example. Yahoo is a very large internet company, especially in the 90s. Uh, Yahoo has practically everything, and all of us know about it. It has a directory, it has mail, it has news, finance, Yahoo Group, advertising. In fact, it was one of the big giants of the 90s, internet giants of the 90s, and thereafter, their fortunes started declining. And eventually they were bought by Verizon a few years ago. But what happened was that the data breach happened somewhere around 2013, 2014. And initially they believed that it was about 500 million accounts that were compromised. But after 2, 3 years, Yahoo revealed that it was not 500 million accounts, but information pertaining to about 3 billion Yahoo users and customers was compromised. And what happened was that around that time, there was a deal that was going through for selling Yahoo to Verizon. And when this information became public, Verizon reduced the price by about $350 million. So that was a direct cost Yahoo had to bear for two things. One is they didn't take too much precaution. They didn't take care. In fact, when the first attack happened, it happened simultaneously on other companies like Google, etc. Google took those attacks seriously. They invested money. They protected themselves. But Yahoo management didn't take it seriously. And this is one of the case studies where management didn't see it as a priority. They thought, let's get into more business areas, let occupy more land in the internet, in the cyber space. And they kept investing in new products rather than securing their existing products. So one of the lessons that one can learn from Yahoo is, one is that they had a very large attack surface. You can see their 3 billion accounts that they had across various services that they were offering. And two is they didn't take cybersecurity seriously. And therefore, the customer confidence in Yahoo started going down. And today, perhaps it's not as big a name as it used to be in the 90s. Another interesting case study is that of Sony Pictures. Sony Pictures Entertainment, we all know they have a TV channel here. They they are the makers of all the Bond movies. But in November, on November 24th, in fact, uh, of 2014, a group that called themselves the Guardians of Peace, they breached the Sony Pictures IT systems and brought their systems down and brought them down to a complete halt. Uh, what happened here was that Sony was going to release a movie which showed the movie was called The Interview, and there was a plot to assassinate Kim Jong Un, the North Korean leader. And the North Koreans were very angry with this, and they wanted Sony to withdraw the release. And they even threatened that, look, if you don't withdraw this, we will infiltrate your systems and um, expose your data to the in the public domain. And the Sony management again didn't heed to the warning. They said that we are not going to back out from releasing this movie. And what happened was that data pertaining to about 47,000 employees, like their social security numbers, their personal information, their family information, emails between employees, very embarrassing emails between major actors and the studio, executive salary information. And above all, when you talk about intellectual property being compromised, 100 terabytes of data was taken out from the system, from Sony's systems, and this included many unreleased movies. So the intellectual property of a movie house or an entertainment uh, company is unreleased films or even released films, but that intellectual property all was exposed in the public domain by hackers. Another case, this really is a different type of case where you can see that if there's even a small vulnerability, even if there's a small opportunity, how hackers uh, can use that opportunity to, and it can be a far-fetched opportunity, as it was in the case of Target. Target is a big retail chain in the US. It's ranked at number 39 on the Fortune 500 list of US corporations in terms of revenue. It's the 8th largest retailer in the US. And you would expect that, they had enough security systems in place. They were compliant with various regulations that were in force at that time. But yet what happened was that uh, cyber thieves launched an attack on Target in a very, very unique way. They actually managed to get hold of the credentials, that is the username password, that's what's called credentials, uh, from a HVAC company, that is your heating and air conditioning company, which is a contractor to Target, and they used to monitor the temperature, etc., in the stores, and these cold stores and all that. So temperature monitoring is required. So Target has given them access to their system, and therefore, using that access, they were able to. The hackers stole the credentials from an employee, and then they actually got into the Target's IT network, and then infiltrated right down to their POS terminals. You know, those POS terminals where you swipe cards. Now, those POS terminals actually are very well protected. There is a global body which has a standard called the PCI DSS standard, and that standard is followed by all POS terminal deployers and manufacturers. And so was the case with Target. But they found a way of scraping encrypted data, which whenever you swipe a card, data gets encrypted. But for a very fleeting moment, this data is in the memory of the POS terminal, and they scraped the memory of that POS terminal and managed to get hold of data of 110 million Target customers. So you can just imagine the kind of scale of the damage and the devastation using the small vulnerability. Today, we all in India, we use chip and pin cards. And this Target attack was actually the first time where card manufacturers decided that let's move into another area where stronger security should exist. And therefore, the chip and pin cards came into use. So all these attacks in some way have actually had some influence on us one way or another. So as they say, the cyber threats of today are still in the annoying range, but the cyber threats of tomorrow may be alarming, as our friend Scott McBride said earlier on. Uh, I'm going to talk about another attack. DIN is a company which is a domain name resolver company, and they used to provide their services to about 80 large companies in the US. You can see big names there. You can see Airbnb, you can see Amazon, you can see probably Wall Street Journal somewhere, and New York Times. And so there were big, very large companies that used to use their services. And here what the hackers did was they executed a DDoS attack. We'll go into more details of what is a DDoS attack a little later, but they used a malware called Mirai. And the Mirai, they use devices, internet connected devices like printers, IP cameras, residential gateways, and baby monitors to actually work as bots, and using that botnet. So what happens in a DDoS attack is typically a large amount of traffic is thrown at the servers, and therefore they are not able to service existing users. So services were impacted for a fairly long period of time, and it happened to the biggest names in the US. Lastly, we'll come to Equifax, and Equifax is a credit monitoring agency which keeps reporting on credit scores, etc. To it's the third largest in the US, and one of the largest companies globally. Here again, it was a very simple thing that there was a patch, there was a vulnerability that was discovered by Microsoft itself, and it was called the Apache Struts vulnerability. And somewhere in the month of March, Microsoft had released of 2017, it had released a patch. But somebody in Equifax, the person who was responsible for updating the patch into the system, did not patch the system in time. What happened was that the hackers found this unpatched server, and they were able to again get data of 147 million American citizens. That's roughly half the population of America. They managed to get their credit information probably credit card numbers, social security numbers, a whole lot of data. So again, a very huge thing, but you can see it was caused by a very, very small uh, incident or a very small piece of negligence that happened. Many things happened because of this. The CEO lost his job, the CISO lost his job, the company had faced a lot of loss of reputation, and therefore you can see that companies are becoming wary of the kind of risks that they have to face. And these examples are there, therefore, to let you know that people are not immune from these risks. These keep coming without warning, without any, and therefore protecting yourself is a major challenge. Let's look at the numbers again a bit, because numbers are very important in terms of our understanding what we are up against. See, the attack surface is growing very rapidly and rampantly. You can see there are 4 billion users, computers connected to the internet, about close to 6 billion smartphone users connected to the internet by the end of this year. Um, if you look at data in 2015, it was about 8 uh, 8.8 zettabytes, and now it is probably 44,028 zettabytes. And if you look it up, I think zettabytes is some 10 to the power of 21 or something like that. And it actually means a trillion gigabytes, because we only know gigabytes, we don't know exabytes and zettabytes, but so it's 1 trillion gigabytes. If you see the IP connections, the devices, we are now around 24 billion devices by the end of 2020, and they're saying it will be 200 million by 2023. If you look at the internet traffic, it's gone up almost 2.5 times. It's about 168 exabytes. I think that's about 10 to the power of 18. So these are huge numbers, and they've grown in 5 years' time. So you can see the relevance of the attack surface that has grown 5 years' time. What does the attack surface do? It actually gives the hackers that many potential points of entry. It gives them that many vulnerabilities. Each point has got multiple vulnerabilities. So you have multiple vulnerabilities, you have multiple devices. So therefore, your exposure or your attack surface is more. If we quickly look at the target sectors which are targeted most by hackers, obviously finance and insurance is the largest, followed by manufacturing, uh, followed by what is called technology, or you can call it information and communication, and then retail and healthcare. And slowly now there are many other verticals that are getting added to this list. And but still largely the focus is around these few verticals as of today. If you look at the evolution of cyber threats, they've evolved in right from the early 90s to today. If we see, it started with basic file viruses. So a file would get corrupted. That was as simple as the way the virus was. Then it became a macro virus, and a macro virus is actually probably a little more harmful. It's something that can, like Shamoon, it can write on your master boot record and then uh, sort of deface and destroy all the information that exists on your drives. Then email threats, and then you started getting hybrid attacks, blended. Then there is this called Warhol attacks, and Warhol attacks are simply attacks which hackers do. Andy Warhol was a famous artist in the US, and he said that everybody looks for 15 minutes of fame in the world, and therefore these kind of threats are run by hacktivists, which are very quick, and in 15-20 minutes they can have very devastating consequences. And now we move to flash threats, which are instant, and within seconds then they can spread malware. Now, what happens is, in the first phase, right up to the blended threats level, some kind of human response was possible. So you could deal with them through human responses. As you went towards more complicated threats and more blended and more complex threats, human response became more difficult or even impossible, and only response possible was automated. And now, if you go further, even automated response cannot do much. It's almost impossible for human response to deal with it. So proactiveness and having a program in place to block threats, having systems in place to block threats is perhaps the way forward. If you look at it in the attacker's point of view, the profile of the attackers has also changed. Earlier, when things started up in the 90s, people were recreational. Their only job was to, get some fame by hacking a few sites and boasting to their friends, maybe. Then slowly the criminals got into the activity. And then from the criminals, the hacktivists took over. Where the hacktivists typically are emotionally committed. They've got some kind of agenda, and they have they target vast networks. And then we move to organized crime, where there are established syndicates. There's a good amount of crimeware available. IP theft is a major objective, and the goal, of course, is primarily economic gain. And then from there we have moved to state sponsored, where even states have got resources which can actually destroy or cripple systems in other countries and other geographies. And cybercrime is big business. It's about globally about $105 trillion, and that's the profits really. And if you see, that's almost the size of the GDP of Russia. So cybercrime has become very, very big. And if you see the top three categories, you'll see illicit illegal markets, theft of IP, and data trading. These three are the biggest components of the market today. So this survey was carried out by one of one of the said, are you worried, or are you but not worried enough in terms of cyber security? How significant is this concern to your organization? And most people said moderate concern. 50% said moderate concern, but about 40% ranked it among their top concerns, and the rest were probably not too concerned about it. This situation, of course, will be different in different geographies, and because the threat perceptions in different geographies are slightly different. So, but if you see on even overall, business disruption due to data breach was 68% across the globe, and highest perhaps in Europe, and then APAC, Australia, not far behind. So everybody is facing this in some way or the other. And the reasons for failure, largely, if you take 52% of the reasons, if you take the top two, lack of awareness, knowledge and skills, and lack of commitment from top management, make up more than 50% of the problem. The others are there, but 50% of the problem lies here. So, for example, just as a point of interest, when a programmer writes code, his purpose of writing code is usually focused on what that code is supposed to deliver. Of course, he looks at some security, but when you as a user, you start using applications, you presume that the programmers and developers have taken care of all the security issues that you may even face. But that's not really the case. If you see, experts say that there's one defect for every 2,500 lines of code that a programmer or developer generates. If you look at your Android phone, it has 12 million lines of code, roughly, which means that you're sitting with about 5,000 vulnerabilities. If you look at Windows, it has 40 million lines of code. Maybe you have anywhere between 15 and 20,000 vulnerabilities. So there are vulnerabilities, but ignorance is bliss. So we are living with it. So one must know that all information technology, the presumption when we use it is it will be safe, it will be secure, but the truth is really a little far away from that. So what are the most common types of cyber threat? I'll quickly run through a few because of paucity of time, but just so some of the most threatening ones today are social engineering attacks, unpatched software, phishing, ransomware, DDoS attacks, Trojans, and advanced persistent threats. There are many more, but we won't go there today. If you look at social engineering, it's really the practice of the art of deception. It is the art of manipulating people into parting with sensitive information and confidential information. People use techniques like baiting. They will try to scare you into parting with information. You would have received a message saying if you don't update your account today, it will get locked. All of us have received messages like that. So this is the art of manipulation. This is how people make you part with confidential information. Pretexting, like a business email, compromise email, which seems to have come from your boss, it seems to have come from your CEO, so you would immediately react to it, but it's actually come from a hacker who spoofed his email ID. Then there's something called phishing and spear phishing. Let's look at all these. But essentially, social engineering is that it's a social engineering attack. It is as much as a technology attack as much as it is a hacking of human nature. So hackers actually who practice social engineering prepare for the attack. They try to deceive their victims and they obtain information over a period of time, and then they try to close the interaction without arousing any suspicion. So this is the form of attack that we must be most wary of, and it's the most difficult to handle from a technology standpoint, because there's only that much technology can do in this space. It's more of a human response issue. Unpatched software, we took the example of Equifax just some time back. And basically, if there's a vulnerability and there's a flaw, and if there's a patch and you don't apply the patch, then you're going to find problems. Therefore, you find companies like Google, Apple, and all of them, they pay you a bounty for finding flaws in their system security. So the bounty, many, as they say, white hat hackers go for the bounty and they find the vulnerabilities and make it known so that patches can be provided. But what happens is that the patches have to be updated both at operating system level, at application level. Sometimes they can be done only at need to be done only at server level. But if it has to be done at client level, again clients have to install it. So users also have to participate and ensure that we keep getting updates on our phones, and we sometimes delay the installation of these updates, but there may be important security updates which you need to put which you need to update immediately. And there can be really big consequences, as you saw in uh, the case of Equifax. Then we look at phishing. Phishing is practiced in multiple ways, and there is no one way, and there's thousands of ways. But here is an example of one way. If you look at the URL, you can see how Amazon is spelled. The Amazon here is spelled with a double N. And basically that link is taking you to a website which is not Amazon's website. It looks like Amazon because down below on the screen you're seeing Amazon. But if you look closely at the URL, it is Amazon with a double N. Now you will go to that web page. It looks like an Amazon web page, and you will enter your username, password, etc. Now it's gone. It's gone out of your hands. It's now in the hands of a hacker. He can do what he wants with it. So this is some of the techniques that hackers use for phishing. Let's look at ransomware. Ransomware is an attack that's going on in a lot of countries. I mean, as we speak, there will be a huge number of ransomware attacks going on. Many counties in the US, their equivalent of municipal corporations have been attacked, and their data has been locked. And typically, the data gets locked. The malware is used to infect, and then the data gets locked, and you don't get access to the data unless you pay the ransom. It's very simple and straightforward. It's a four-step process. First, there's a bait, and the bait is usually something topical, something interesting, something you'll click on. The minute you click on the email attachment, because of its context, uh, you've infected the system. And if you've infected the system, then the infection spreads, and then you'll get a ransomware notice, and either you pay, and many times if you pay also, I think you don't get access to data. So ransomware is something that's troubling people all over the world, and it's a very dangerous form of, especially for corporate businesses. We talked earlier a little bit in the context of the DIN attack on regarding the DDoS attack. And the DDoS attack simply is pushing too much traffic to the servers by taking control of various unused computers or unused computing devices, by taking over control of them, by infecting them with malware. Mirai is a very famous malware which does this. And once, so it's like a hacker sitting with a huge army of people who have been kind of, or computers or computing devices that are under his control, which are sending a huge amount of traffic, internet messages to the target servers, and therefore the target servers cannot, uh, goes out of resources and cannot respond to legitimate users. Trojans, you've all probably read in your childhood the story of the ancient Greek story of how the deceptive Trojan horse was placed inside the city of Troy, and that led to the fall of the city of Troy. So a Trojan horse is also like that. It looks like a legitimate computer object. It looks like a legitimate application, but it is not. And but it's sitting there inside your system and then helping the hacker execute his plans using the Trojan software. Advanced persistent threats are a broad term which actually mean many things, because there are many types of attacks that can be termed as advanced persistent type of attacks. But usually these are well-resourced attacks, well-studied attacks. They are usually done by a sponsored group. They gain unauthorized access, stay in the system for an extended period of time. And you remember the Sony attack we talked about? That's an advanced persistent threat. It was found that hackers actually were inside Sony systems for close to 3 months. Uh, and therefore, this is one of the places where uh, companies have to be very careful. If they get targeted, it takes time for them to discover the attack, and then by which time the hackers have gone deep into their systems, and in a stealth mode, they've been able to access a lot of information. And it typically comes in 3 steps. First, there's an infiltration, then there's an expansion within the network or within the network, and then there's exfiltration where the data goes out, like the 10 terabytes of data that went out of Sony. So why is cybersecurity important? Why is cyber risk so important? The World Economic Forum, in their Global Risk Outlook report for 2019, ranked data fraud and theft and cyber attacks at number 4 and 5, not in terms of global risks in terms of impact, but in terms of likelihood. So they believe that data fraud and theft, along with and cyber attacks, along with things like climate change and natural disasters, are right up there in terms of the likelihood of happening. So that is why at a global level it has become very important. Purely if you look at it from a North American point of view, the North American Global Risk Report ranks it as the number one risk that they face. They put it ahead of terrorist attacks, asset bubbles, fiscal crisis, and failure of climate change. So North America is almost paranoid about cyber risks and cyber attacks. What does the Indian scenario look like? Reports say that 76% of businesses were hit by cyber attacks in 2018. India was the country with the third, the highest number of cyber attacks to individual businesses in 2018, after Mexico and France. And your friendly neighborhood banks, SBI, HDFC, ICICI, Yes Bank, Axis, were all hit in 2016, and about 3.2 million debit cards information were compromised. India has been lucky in that sense that we haven't had a very major high profile attack. But you've been reading all the while, Aadhaar information has gone to the darknet. About just last week, another 3.9 million data got compromised again. So attacks are happening, but we've yet to see the kind of high profile attacks that we talked of to a corporate house yet, but it can happen anytime. If you look at it from a risk point of view, why is it a key business risk? Because there are three areas where you can look at 3 types of risks that this cyber risk uh, is made up of. One is the business operational risk itself, which is the cost of failure of critical business systems, people, or practices. The second is the loss of your probable cost due to the loss of reputation, damage or injury caused to your reputation or brand image. And third is the direct legal cost of either infringement of laws or regulatory requirements or compliance, or legal action taken by third parties if their data has got compromised. Coming back to a quick look at the overall environment in which we are operating today, email spam is the most common method for cyber criminals to spread malware. Obviously, because phishing emails are used most in phishing. Roughly one out of 5 files, that is 20% of our files are not protected. Cybercrime is becoming more profitable than illegal drug trade. Users in the US open around 1 in 3 phishing emails. In India, I think it's 1:4. So out of every 4 phishing emails, 1 is opened. Information loss accounts for 43% of costs in cyber attacks. So you can imagine by the end of 2020, there will be 300 billion passwords utilized across the world. And we will talk about passwords a little later. But this is one key area where all of us are make mistakes and use the kind of passwords we shouldn't be using. Personal data can be purchased on the dark web now anywhere between 20 cents to 15. I believe the Indian data that has been exposed is available for 3 cents. If you have a data breach, it typically takes companies over 6 months to even notice that the data breach has actually happened. And 71% of customers say if my data, if your my data is exposed or compromised through your organization, then I would leave, I would no longer be your customer. If you look at the frequency, hacker attack globally is happening now every 39 seconds. We are lucky we are not being attacked. Only 38% of global companies know how to handle a big cyber attack. So should it happen. Small businesses are also not free from these attacks. 43% of all attacks are directed to small businesses. 91% of the attacks use phishing emails, and a business falls victim to a ransomware attack every 14 seconds. So ransomware is becoming trickier and trickier. 38% of all malicious attacks are one type of Microsoft file or the other. And the global cost of online cybercrime is expected to be 6 trillion by 2021. So we come to the point, what are hackers actually looking for? Should we be worried still in spite of all this? Does it affect us? Is it near us? Till the coronavirus hit India, we were not really that concerned, right? We said, okay, it happens, happening everywhere else. It doesn't happen to us, it won't happen here. But when it happened, it hit all of us. Similarly, we can learn a lot from the rest of the, which is already going through more difficult times in terms of, so hackers also have very specific targets. They're not looking for random information that they can lay their hands on. They're very clear on what they're searching. These are some of the things. They're looking for your customer information. They're looking for your financial information, looking for your strategic plans. They're looking for your board member information. They're looking for your R&D information. They're looking for your customer passwords. They're looking for intellectual property. They're looking for mergers and acquisition information. This is the case after Yahoo, because they know they can cause damage during a merger and acquisition transaction. They're looking at IP, patented and non-patented, of course, both. And they're looking at your supplier information. So we briefly looked at history, consequences of a data breach, the increasing attack surface, evolution of attacks and defense mechanisms, major types of cyber threats, who is out to harm you, what do they want, the cybersecurity environment, and cyber risks as a key business risk. Now, there are people who have said that cybercrime is the greatest risk to every company in the world. And these people are no less than the former chairman of IBM, Ginni Rometty, who said this. So the faster and quicker companies realize that cyber threats and cyber risks are a threat to their very business, they can be completely found wanting if unforeseen incident were to take place. So that concludes part. That is the answer to the first question. And if there are any questions at this point, I can take so that we can then move on to the second part.
Umar, if allowed, I will be happy to ask a question.
Yes, sir, please.
Uh, yes. Thank you very much, sir, for your very nice presentation. Uh, One thing I have observed that many companies who are actually, under attack or has been affected, they are very shy in coming forward and admitting it. For one, they think that there is a reputation loss, and other, I have felt, I'm not very sure if this is true, but they also feel the danger of legal and compliance risk point of view. So because of this, the attack themselves are not coming forward, and they're trying to manage it, uh, within their own group, and that reduces the probability of action which can be taken against those attackers, and remedial measures could be taken on time. So what do you think, could be a strategy, safer strategy to address this emerging threat?
Thank you for your question. It's a very important and interesting question. I was on another panel a few days ago, and a co-panelist actually gave out some very interesting statistics, and he said that only 3% of cyber crimes are being reported in India.
My God.
3%.
So 97% is not reported.
Yes. Not just crimes against business, but crimes against individuals also. Victims are not coming forward. There are 2-3 reasons for this. Let me look at the first reason. As you rightly pointed out, if we go back to the Yahoo case study, Yahoo themselves felt that they can get away by not reporting it, and it took almost 3 years for them to go from 500 million accounts to 3 billion accounts. You can see but the actual hacking happened at the same time, more or less. But they gave out the information in bits and pieces. First they said 500 million, then they said 1 billion, and then they increased 100 billion finally. So slowly they moved the line, and this is not only a problem in India, it's a problem globally. But now regulators and laws have come in place globally, like from the GDPR law in Europe. Within 72 hours, you are supposed to report, and this law is now applied in the US also, that you are supposed to report to the regulator within 72 hours. So timelines have been set, and also the penalties are very high now. In GDPR, for example, fines can go up to 4% of global turnover. So they have the problem that looks like other countries have also grappled with. In our case, I think the problem is a little more systemic. People have very little belief that our people can bring people to book, can bring the culprits to book, and the fact that we have the systems in place to identify, to investigate, the forensic systems, the legal systems, and the legal support that is required to actually uh, bring it to book. Second, I think cyber insurance is in its nascency in India. If you had insurance per force, you would have had to lodge a complaint. So as insurance policies become available to companies who can protect themselves with cyber insurance, today they probably protect very little of the damage that can be caused. Policies are coming, and they are available overseas, which give you better coverage, bigger coverage, broader coverage, and that will then enable or rather force companies to not hide these attacks, but to make them public. And even within companies, many attacks are not known because they're treated like an IT problem and dealt with. So I think we are on a learning curve. We are in the process of learning, and what you've said is a very real problem. And companies, out of embarrassment, loss of reputation, they're all worried about all of this, and also probably legal cases are not so seriously taken here as they are in the US or other countries. But there are still consequences and liabilities that companies have to face. And I think the regulations are becoming a little tighter now. With the data protection regulation coming into India, there will be a need for disclosure, and there will be a need to file. Now it's a bill. When it comes into effect, I think it will force people to actually file
Thank,
complaint.
thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
So I will move on to the next, unless there are any further questions at this point.
So we can move on to the next part.
All right. So let's move on to the next part. This is again something which a lot of organizations grapple with. Who is actually responsible for cybersecurity? When you talk to different organizations, you'll get different answers to this question as well. Because traditionally there was a particular point of view, and that point of view probably doesn't hold too much of water now. But as things stand, things are changing by the day, and systems are also evolving, especially in India, in corporate India. So let's see who's responsible for cybersecurity. If you see the traditional approach which we've been used to, if you go back 5 years, 6 years in time, you'll find that clearly it was the responsibility of solutions. Any action towards cybersecurity was reactive. It was ad hoc. Uh, there was not that kind of belief that the information that the company was holding has real great external value. This was the feeling. There was barely much involvement from the leadership. Employee awareness was poor, and other business initiatives were of much greater importance. So this is what existed a few years ago. If we look a little, if we move further in time towards present day, and this is a common approach which you will see now in present day, where people are aware of threats, they are being attacked, there are cyber incidents that are happening, there are issues that are being faced. So, but the focus is often in this phase on threat management. That means look at the threat landscape and then manage that threat landscape with technology, again, in terms of technology based solutions. It's more compliance oriented. So there are laws you have to comply with if you are a particular organization. For example, SEBI has passed a regulation that all brokers need to maintain certain standards. They need to maintain a security operations center and so on and so forth. So therefore, for compliance, you have to do this. The focus is also external threats, but we must realize that internal threats are more dangerous sometimes than external threats, because internal threats can happen because of a disgruntled employee, because it can happen because of a compromised credential which an internal employee has lost. And therefore our focus needs to be on internal threats as well as external threats. But broadly, when we look at threat, we look externally. This is human nature again. We are presently using multiple point solutions. So if there's a problem for perimeter security, we'll buy a solution for perimeter security. If there's a problem for particular level device security, then we will address it with that device security solution. So we don't have a properly integrated full-fledged solutions in place today. There's lack of clarity on hybrid systems, cloud and own IT. Now, where does the cloud service provider responsibility end? Where does it yours begin? But you must know that the responsibility for the data is only yours. It's not the cloud service provider. The cloud service provider, you can tie him up with SLAs and he will have a good system of security. But the point is, it's not unbreakable like any other security systems are. It's not unbreakable. So this line between cloud security and your own security is really, you need a lot of clarity on that in terms of operationalizing your cyber security model. Still, organizations have very limited skill sets and response capabilities. Human issues continue to be a major source of vulnerabilities, and there is challenge in keeping up with new technologies. They're coming so fast that organizations, by the time they implement one, already two new technologies are ready to be. and responsibilities are moving from maybe CIO, or you may even have a CISO who's a security officer, but responsibilities typically still remain in that domain between a CIO and a CISO. But if we look at a clear, a comprehensive approach, what it needs is a total clarity of purpose to start with. And you need to adopt a kind of framework, an overarching cybersecurity and cyber risk framework, which will then help you to deal with the elements that comprise this kind of a framework. You need to identify threats and risks. You need to identify what your key information assets are. Without knowing that, you don't know what to protect. All information is not equal. Some information is more dear to you, more valuable to your company, more important for your customers than other pieces of information. So you need to identify your key information assets. You need to classify and prioritize your risks, prepare a risk mitigation plan, enhance your security awareness, develop good incident monitoring and response systems. Collaboration is key. If one firm in a particular industry is hit with a particular type of attack, you could be the next if you're from the same industry. So collaboration, industry forums, participation in industry forums is very important. Deploying appropriate technology platforms. From point solutions, things are moving towards platforms which enable you to do a lot more in an integrated way, give you an integrated visibility of what is happening enterprise in terms of your threats. And therefore you need to choose and implement proper platforms and integrate them. Involve everyone in cybersecurity. It's not just the responsibility of a single person, it's the responsibility of the board, it's the responsibility of senior leadership, it's the responsibility of managers, and of course all the employees, and actually beyond suppliers and so on. So let's again come to the question, who's responsible? Is it the board? Is it the CEO? Is it the CIO? Is the C? Is it the risk manager? Is it the CFO? Is the cloud service provider? More often than not, you might find it's very hard to tell and you're not sure. And therefore, when you're not sure, that means that you do not have the basic systems in place to deal with any kind of crisis that might come your way. Ideally, all should be involved. And so certainly cybersecurity is not only everybody's responsibility, it's everyone's job and it's everyone's duty. But as you can see from the slide, it is centered around leadership. It is the job of the leadership to drive cybersecurity, a security first culture across the organization. So the kind of emphasis and the importance that security deserves is given right from business plans and business strategy, and integrated with business plans and business strategy. So if we look at the role of leadership in this process, it's managing and mitigating overall cyber related business risk, of course, instituting effective governance control. That's the leadership, to put a governance mechanism in place, prioritizing and resourcing cybersecurity programs. Only the leadership can allocate budgets, people, resources, staff, everything is in the hands of leadership. Safeguarding and the sensitive information, making sure people know which information is sensitive, which is not, which information is confidential and which is not, and establishing a cyber secure culture within the organization. So that's the second part. So clearly, cybersecurity is something that deserves priority in today's scheme of things, in the overall environment in which businesses operate. Responsibilities need to be fixed. They need to have clarity of purpose, and they need to have a very proactive strategy in place for cybersecurity. So then how can businesses secure their information? So we come to the third part, and the third question is what they can do to secure their information. So as Ronald Reagan once said, information is, it can seep through barbed wire, it can go through electrified borders, it can go anywhere. It's like oxygen. So that's the challenge. So like oxygen can pass through anything, so can information. So therefore, now how can we secure information? So I want to draw a slight distinction between cyber security, information security. Though overarching words we use are cyber security, But cybersecurity, in a very precise sense, is the practice of systems, networks, and programs from digital attacks. So it is really the core part of cybersecurity is in protecting systems, networks, and programs. If you look at information security, it's more about a set of processes that maintain the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of your business data in various forms. And typically, when you say data in various forms, you refer to it as in three forms: data in use, data in motion, data at rest. These are the three forms data takes. So in all these three forms, you need to maintain the confidentiality, you need to maintain the integrity so that there's no corruption of the data, and it is available to the users as and when it is required. So the modern approach to cybersecurity is three-pillar approach. It involves three pillars. One is process, people, and technology, if you will. That is data and information. And data and information today, you will see there are two things mentioned there. It's called IT and OT. And IT is your information technology, OT is your operational technology. Today, we use a lot of operational technology. We are moving towards a world of robotics where even more operational technology will be deployed. And data refers to your personal data and professional data. Processes, all your information processes, your governance processes, your policies and procedures, and your third party processes that you have to deal with third parties. And people is really training and awareness, professional skills, uh, authorization, and physical security. So these three pillars have to be combined together. It's not purely a technology game. It's no longer just a technology function. It has to encompass all these three pillars. If you look at the typical components of information systems, there are 5 components. You have hardware, you have software, you have data, you have people, and you have procedures. So all these 5 together must work in a secure way to ensure that your information and information systems are secure. Let's try and see what are the indicators. How will you know if a cyber attack is going on? You are an employee or you are working for an organization. How will you figure out if a cyber attack is going on? These are some of the telltale signs of a cyber attack. You will find the systems sluggishly or in unusual ways. You'll find unusually heavy network traffic. Many bounced emails will start bouncing. You will find your antivirus software is deactivated. You will find new user accounts have been created. You will find log files that have been cleaned out. You will find unsuccessful attempts to log in from systems which are not in your radar. Many of these things may not affect end users, but your IT department, your folks at the security operations center will be able to monitor this and see whether any of this is happening. So these are just some of the indicators that a cyber attack is taking place. If you look at the layers of security now, if you look at the layers of security that are required, if you see where your mission critical assets are sitting in this, on one side you have prevention, and on the other side you have monitoring and response. And if you see, for example, I'll give you a simple thing. An organization, unless it has a predefined policy on use of personal devices, the bring your own devices, unless there's a clear policy, a defined policy, people will do what comes naturally to them, and therefore you are exposing yourself to a lot of unwanted threats. So policies have to be there for every security area. For example, many project themselves in the social media. Now you need to have a policy for that. Unless you have policies for these things, it's going to be very hard for you to control any wanton usage. For typically, you need two things: you need controls and you need monitoring. You need to set controls and see how effective those controls are, and if they're not enough, you have to increase the controls. If they're too tight, you have to ease them a little, and it's a trade-off, and you have to keep monitoring and respond to situations that are coming up. You see, security has also become layered now. You have a data level security where you can encrypt all the data, keep data in encrypted form, so that even if somebody hacks through, is not able to decrypt the data and your network security. One of the aspects of network security is to segment your networks. I don't know how many of you read about 6 months ago, there was a news item that the Kundankulam nuclear plant, there was a uh, computer that was infected. And fortunately for all of us, the infection was into an administrative PC, and it was not connected to the nuclear plant. Otherwise, hell could have broken loose. So network segment helps you in kind of breaking up your network into multiple segments. So even if hackers manage to get through in one segment, they can't penetrate another segment. And then perimeter security. But you can see all this takes care of outsider threat protection. That means any threat that's coming from outside. But what remains is still a problem is the threat that comes from inside, from an insider. So information management basically and risk management, there are 10 steps which can help you manage things better. The first is managing user privileges. We are very easily give users access to data, privileges. If I'm a CEO, I will get more access to all the data sets, and I can do anything. But the point is that it makes the system very vulnerable. If somebody were to hack a CEO's password, he can get all the information using those privileges. Similarly, the administrators have full privileges to do anything. So therefore, managing user privileges, keeping them to a minimum, depending on need, giving only need-based access is important. Second is to have an incident management system in place, an incident response team, an incident management response system in place. Thirdly, you need to have monitoring. Fourth, you need to have home and mobile working security systems in place, security guidelines in place. You need to put in configurations. The way you configure your systems is very important today. If you leave it to the default configurations given by manufacturers, you may be exposed to certain risks. Removable media controls, very dangerous. Bring a USB from outside, put it into your laptop. You may be infecting not just your laptop, you may be pushing malware into your whole organization. Malware protection, various forms of malware can be detected early if you have kind of antiviruses installed on every device, every laptop, wherever it's possible, feasible. You have malware put in place. User education and awareness. It's a very simple thing, very easy thing, which can give you the best returns in terms of value for your money. If you spend money on spreading user education and awareness, you're going to get great return on your investment, and I'll tell you why in a little while. And network security. So these are some of the steps that you can take. I'm just familiarizing you with some of the tools that are available. Earlier, people used to think that if I buy a firewall, I'll purchase some more software and my cyber security is taken care of. These are all the software that is available today, and probably much more than what I have here. But in spite of buying all this software and implementing it, you may still find vulnerabilities because there are processes and people there. So this is just the technology part. So you also have the process part and the people part to take care of. And that's why you need a framework, you need a proper cyber security program to address all the areas of vulnerability and not just the technology part. So I'm not going to go into detail here, but you can see a lot of issues like encryption can help you in keeping your data encrypted. Authentication, we are increasingly hearing about multi-factor authentication, which helps rather than a simple username, password, biometric, you have other forms of authentication, and even hardware-based authentication, which can help and limit people getting into your system. The use of virtual private networks. Today, people who are working from home are all advised to use virtual private networks when they are connected to the office systems, and so on and so forth. So there are several pieces of uh, technology and tools available here. Last but not least, data backup and recovery, very important, because end, if your data by any chance gets compromised, if your data gets corrupted, then you will have to load from backup and recover from there. So the need for an online backup recovery system, etc., building, as they say, the goalpost is moved from cyber security now to cyber resilience. So your business has to be cyber resilient, not just secure. So if you look at an organizational security model, the first part is actually dealing with the to protect, shield, defend, and prevent. So this is the first part of what you want to do. The second is you want to get more proactive. You want to monitor, hunt, and detect, and then, but you still need to have your defenses in place. You need to respond, recover, and sustain if still the attack goes through. And to do all this, you need management, you need governance, you need compliance, you need education, and you need formal systems of risk management. So what do you do? So you look for a framework, you look for a cyber security framework, which incorporates all three aspects of cyber security, that is technology, process, people. What are these frameworks? What do they look like? One is an ISO 27001 framework. Now 27001 is only one standard. The ISO has a family of standards. There are about 3 or 4 standards that take care of data protection, network protection, and also information management. They are called the ISMS standards, Information Security Management System, the 27001 standard. It's a global standard. It's followed across the world. You can get your organization certified. There are 14 major domains which are covered under this standard. There are about 114 controls. You can take and pick and choose the controls that are applicable to your organization and implement them and monitor and keep following the system, which takes you right from risk management to risk mitigation. The other is another famous US framework called NIST, and it helps you identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. These are the 5 stages that the network defines. It's a voluntary, it's more for US companies, but it can be adopted and used across the world. It doesn't give you any certification. You don't get a certificate. But if you're a company which is doing business with the US, then you need to have this kind of a system in place. It's well recognized in the US. So what are, we know we've identified the risks, we've identified what those risks are, who should be responsible for managing those risks. So what are the alternatives open to us? How do we manage risks? So the first is that we can, if we know a risk, if we know and we prioritize a risk, we try to figure out how we can avoid the risk. Avoiding the risk may be completely that, look, this business is not for me. I don't want to set up, like State Bank of India doesn't want to set up a cryptocurrency exchange because they feel that no, that risk is too high. I don't want to get into cryptocurrency. And so you can avoid the risk. You can just sidestep the risk and you can find another path to do your business. Second is you accept the risk and say that no, I would like to be in this business. I accept the risk and I will use whatever methodology I can and my understanding and protect myself and protect my customers and my key information in any way that I can. The third is you can transfer or share the risk. You can share the risk between business partners, supply chain partners, or you can transfer the risk or share it with an insurance company. You can always get insurance, and to that extent, you are in effect, you're transferring a part of your risk, or if you get a complete comprehensive policy, you can transfer the whole risk, but you rarely get that kind of a policy, but you can transfer the risk. You can also mitigate the risk. Now, the mitigation of risk is the most important thing that we are looking at through various measures, technology, processes, and people, all used to mitigate risk. So you can deploy your resources to mitigate the risk. And lastly, if you're really good at it, you may say that, look, this is a risk. I understand, I appreciate this is a risk. Now I want to exploit this risk and I can take care of this risk. I will grow my business and I will exploit this risk to grow my business. So that's another way of dealing with. So these are the alternatives that you have on the table. And it is for boards and the senior leadership to understand what these risks alternatives are, and then have a plan for each risk, and then create a strategy to implement those risks. Let's look at the human factor in cybersecurity. IBM did a study and they found that 95% cybersecurity breaches, mark my words, 95%, that is 19 out of 20 cyber breaches would not have happened but for human beings. So that means the role of the human being is still so important a factor in cybersecurity. Because somewhere around it goes to even phishing or any type of social engineering attack, there's a human involved at one end who's actually triggering that attack, and there's a human being there who's clicking on an email and he's spreading them. So if we were able to somehow miraculously address this, 19 out of 20 attacks won't happen. But it's difficult. But then, as I told you before, if you can do this through training, awareness, situational awareness, and care and proper guidance, you can reduce your threats to by great margin. So let's come to the last part of this, and I'm just overshooting the time a little bit, but I'll just finish this very quickly. What can you do? What can you as a user or a business manager do about it? The first thing you can do is think and connect. Don't click without thinking, because that is a reckless way of doing things. But as far as possible, stick to your own device. Don't use others' devices. Don't let others use your devices. Follow security guidelines. Most organizations are now giving out guidelines. Please use them, whether you're working from home or anywhere else. Those guidelines are not to be flouted. Be aware of your surroundings. People, this is largely to do with large organizations where people do shoulder surfing and people kind of try to get passwords and stuff like that by tailgating and stuff. So be aware of your surroundings. Keep track of your digital footprint. Set strong passwords and change them regularly. There's a company which prints the top 10 most common passwords, and 9 times out of 10, if you see the list of that passwords, it reads like 1236 password. Password itself is a password, and somewhere somebody goes from 1 to 9, somebody goes from 1 to 6, and still people are using these kind of passwords. And if you see that 300 billion passwords are going to be in use this year, and if there are passwords like this, they'll be easy to hack. The other things is the default passwords that come from the manufacturer for routers and other devices. They typically come with two types of username and password. It's admin and admin. If you ask your IT guy sometimes what's what for this, he'll say admin. That means that they've not even changed the password, which means that you are open to all sorts of risks. So people can guess that, and wherever admin is working, you can hack through that many devices. And so changing passwords, keeping them strong, following the guidelines for the passwords, and changing passwords regularly, and having 8 digits, 10 digits. Now they say don't use a word, use a phrase. It's more difficult to crack because a lot of algorithms are trying to use brute force attacks to crack passwords. Keep up with the updates. We talked about how important updating is. Securely try to use a VPN. Don't make financial transactions using public wireless networks and so on. Always very risky. Secure your mobile device. Beware of social engineering techniques. There are various hundreds and hundreds of social engineering techniques. Always be aware, because even a momentary lapse, you could get into trouble. You'll simply get an SMS that your account will be locked. Please call on this number, or please respond to this number. And the minute you go there, you call that number, he says, okay, now you give me your password, you give me this, you give me that. Slowly you're giving up information that you don't want to give. Back up your data. Remember, you're not immune. You can't just say that it won't happen to me. It can happen to you or anybody else, because cyber criminals, they don't discriminate in targeting any user or any company. They just. So what are the key attributes of a successful cyber risk management strategy? Choose a framework, an appropriate framework that is appropriate for your organization. Leadership should start at the top of the organization. Do a proper risk assessment. Identify your critical systems and risks. Identify your cyber threats and vulnerabilities. Deploy your risk mitigation strategies. Create awareness. Understand your regulatory and compliance requirements. Build and implement response plans and implement response systems, recovery systems, and business continuity. You must always remember that you need to assume and plan for the worst and controls in advance for dealing with such situations. Purchase cyber insurance and move from cyber security and towards information assurance and cyber resilience. And you need to determine from time to time where you are in this journey. It's a cybersecurity maturity journey. You can start with ad hoc if you are ad hoc, then you can move into a place where you believe that your systems are developing, then you are actually practicing the systems, then you're optimizing and leading. So the goal is to go around this curve and actually move towards optimizing and leading rather than be using ad hoc measures and solutions, because the threats are real, the threats are large, and the threats are very potent, and they can be very potent. So thank you very much. I'm actually done. Any further questions? I'm open to that if we have the time.
Thank you so much, sir. This was a very detailed and a very informative presentation. I guess it was completely customized for the needs and requirements that
Yes,
this particular audience had.
absolutely.
Thank you so much for that. A couple of questions that I had.
Sure.
One was with regards to applications that we
Yes.
download on our mobiles,
Yes.
and they tend to ask for a lot of things which may not necessarily be a requirement for having those applications. So
Correct.
how do you try, and because then that exposes you to a lot of systemic risk. And two, recently with regards to NPCI, there was, I guess last week itself or this week itself, there was a news that their systems have been compromised and UPI IDs of a lot of users have been leaked out. So how do
Yeah.
you try and put some light onto that, if
Yeah.
you are aware of these two cases?
Yeah. So let me take the first one. There are many pieces of software that you can download today and applications that download. Uh, Take the example of Truecaller. It was found, people thought it was a very useful application. I know exactly who's calling me before I take the call and avoid nuisance calls coming my way. But people realize that they ask when you're downloading the app, they ask for your contact list. They ask for access to your contact list. And Truecaller got compromised globally. So once they got compromised globally, all your information of not only your own information, but your contacts information that you had probably could have got compromised. Similarly, there are apps which ask for your camera access. There are apps that ask for your voice access. So there are, unless you actually need that application. In fact, the platform that we are using today, that also got hacked, Zoom,
Right.
some time back, and they're fixing all the patches, and they're releasing, and they went through major upgrade about 2 weeks ago, and the services all came down. But the point is that it's a revolving story. It's the human mind versus the human mind at the end of the day. There's a clever person sitting at one end to exploit the story. There's another person sitting there developing the app with a good intention, but maybe not the best practices. So as I said, we believe that a developer will take care of all types of scenarios. So the developer, when he's developing, their degree of innocence. If you take the developer profile, typically, they are people who are below maybe 25, 30 years of age. They don't have the business context or the security context in mind in which the application may actually be used. So therefore, these kind of discrepancies come, and therefore you need outside help to do pen testing and so on, penetrating testing, which tells you. So as far as the apps are concerned, they are also saying now that if you an app for a long time on your phone, just delete it. If you want, download it again, but delete it. Don't keep it there, because you never know when that will be hacked. And on an average, we have, I think, close to 40 to 70, anywhere between 40 and 70 apps on our phones today. So that we are increasing our vulnerability by doing that. And if we don't know which app is using which type of feature and what kind of information. So as a rule, probably like minimum privileges, user privileges, as they say in organizations, you must give minimum privileges even if you need the app. I mean, there's so much dispute now on the Arogya Setu app also on this
Right.
count, and it's hard. It's not easy to find a solution to that, because now they're saying no, the data will self-destruct in 3 months and so on. Where is the guarantee? If NPCI can be hacked, which has the highest level of security, the UPI, which is probably having, in the Indian context, very high levels of security. If they could hack through that, so you can see that we are vulnerable in many ways. The first thing that happens when a hacking incident comes and you suspect that your data could have gone, change all the passwords, change all the usernames, delete the app. So this is the first thing that you can do, which is in your control. The rest is really beyond your control. But what I'm saying is the situational awareness and the context today is very important. So anything that you do, you need to look at the context and how badly you need it. If you don't need it, don't do. You can do without it, because they have a way of making that app look very attractive that your life will not depend on it. You know, there are simple photo apps. Those photo apps will actually create a photo album for you, put some music in that, and you can use it. We all love to do these kind of things and play around with our families, send it to somebody. But you know, you're giving access to all your photos. Now, sometimes when you have access to photos, you may photograph a check, you may photograph your signature, you may photograph some document, you may photograph some degree. So much data can potentially go. Now, whether it goes or not, you don't know. But you know, so these are some of the challenges when you're downloading apps. And if you're not using them, probably best thing is to delete them. Use it when you're using them again, install them, and probably that's the way to go. And UPI, I think is going to be, we still don't know the full consequence, and they're saying that, you know, it's available at 2 to 3 cents every UPI account on the dark web, and somewhere it's saying it's available free also. So data is getting exposed, and it is dangerous because it's payment information, it's payment transfers, it's account information, account numbers, IFSC codes, beneficiary name. You know, these are all very, very critical pieces of information, which you cannot change overnight. You cannot change any of these. So there are threats, and I really don't know which way this will go. It's too new to know what kind of damage it will cause. But in America, it happened. I told you, half the population in Equifax got exposed, their credit card number, social, and there, you know, a credit card number is, they don't even have two-factor authentication like we do have.
True.
OTP, this, that, you know, so it's even more dangerous. But then they have the legal system, you know, you can file a case, they put some credit monitoring agencies to monitor your account, and if you lose some money, they reimburse it. Those kind of systems we don't have in place today.
Right. Thank you. In fact, a couple of observations that I had when you spoke of the first case where, to a question that Sharik sir raised in terms of SEBI and other organizations trying to build up a system around, and I've seen a couple of cases very closely on personal level with cybersecurity, and the cyber cops themselves were absolutely unaware. Didn't even know how to use a pen drive. I remember sitting in the police station and helping the guy access the laptop and, you know, run through the hard drive and everything. And this is the cyber team that I was talking about. Of course, this is a few years back, but then this is the extent to which the manpower was not really geared up to. And an extreme case of this was one of my bosses who used to, as you said, you know, people have access to, or apps has access to cameras. His laptop, the front camera was permanently taped with a black cello tape. So it would always be said, I don't want to reveal out anything. And because he came from a security background, he knew what all possibilities were there as far as the systems were concerned. So these are two extremes that I've seen.
Yeah. If you see, even before this whole corona thing spread, safety was important to have in India. The rest was, you know, like, okay, we've lived so far, we lived with so many threats and challenges, we'll continue to live that way. That was our attitude. But it's, you know, brought safety sharply into focus now. Similarly, security, because we are all digital personalities today, all of us are digital, whether we like it, we don't like it, we have an existence in the digital world. Half our existence, perhaps on a daily basis, is also in the digital world.
Right.
So given that much of exposure, and it's already growing by the day, we have even streaming services. Even when you're entertaining yourself, you are connected there, you have a username, you have a password, you have everything there. So we are kind of half digital beings today. So this threat is going to become severe. Just awareness will help you in avoiding a lot of situations. That is at least at a base level very important. It may not help you in every situation in every way, but it will kind of definitely help you wherever you know, it's a simple threat. You can at least deal with it.
Thank you. Any queries anybody has? Anybody?
Umar, if you allow me one question.
Yes, sir, please.
Yeah, sir. looking at the entire context, and I think uh, what kind of opportunity in terms of career you could foresee for management graduates in the areas like cyber security, or don't you see any opportunity for them? It has to be only engineers, or maybe some other higher level courses, uh, background people only can
Sir,
avail this.
my thing on this, and that's why I've written this book on cybersecurity for business managers. I think cybersecurity as a subject is now moved away from technology to business management. And many schools across the world, business schools across the world, have made it a part of their curriculum today. It is part of their MBA curriculum that cybersecurity and cyber risk management is must learn. And therefore, I think a business manager of today, a business manager of yesterday, like me, when I became a business manager, I did not need to know anything about it. But today, if you're stepping into the cyber world without the knowledge of what you're, see, today you may not have any direct responsibility for it, but you still have a role to play in cyber security. So a business manager will eventually, these are the CEOs of tomorrow, these are the general managers of tomorrow. They are going to be in the flash of an eye, maybe in 5, 6 years or 10 years, they will all be in very senior leadership positions. And therefore, they must speak the language of cybersecurity even with technology people. If you see this whole coronavirus situation that is being handled, see the technology part is only a small part of the story to mitigate the risks. The migrant situation, there are so many beds, hospitals, administration, kits to be arranged, resources. You see all those are management subjects. They are not technical medical subjects. For the same thing actually applies in this context as well, that it is today, at least I firmly believe, a management subject, and every entrant and every business manager a practicing business manager today must undergo a course in cyber security, in cyber risk management, because at some level he is carrying a responsibility for making his operations safe. I'll give you an example. Many marketing departments seek permission to use social media to actually boost their product reviews and this and that, and then that's not even integrated into the IT part of the systems or anything like that. They don't follow any guidelines. They just wantonly do anything, and they are exposing the whole company to such wide variety of risks. So this is the problem. Once the risk perception in the senior management and the board is clear that, look, this is a risk, this is the enemy that we are all collectively fighting, then every force at your disposal, every soldier, right from foot soldier to the top, has to get involved in this fight. And we have enough, we don't have enough examples in India right now, as of today, of any major stuff. And even if they are, as you rightly pointed out earlier, we don't know, they have not been reported. But the point is that these things could very well happen at any given point of time. They happen without warning, and our legal system is pretty fragile in this area also as of today. So I think the best is that people become familiar, even in their personal lives, when they're today half digital personalities. They need to know what information to share, what privacy to allow, how much of data they want to be exposed. And I think people like the GDPR Act has defined this in such great detail, and so will our data protection bill. So we could be leading a very different information life post the data protection bill, and where it will become an absolute regulatory necessity. Today it is probably not so much of a regulatory necessity. Even our health information today, it can, we read on TV who's got COVID and who doesn't have COVID. So but this is all supposed to be very private information, and if we have an act like HIPAA here, then we will have to follow those kind of guidelines. So, and the responsibility for following them will rest with business managers, not with IT.
Thank you, sir. I think even the case like NSC, where Algo Trade case was going on, and the CEO said that she is not aware of
Yes.
the technology background, and court didn't accept that. Say that being leader, you are supposed to know that.
Yeah.
So the risk of not knowing is more than actually being familiar and then taking precautions.
Yeah. So they also say, and I often believe in this, that management is about asking the right, having about all the answers, the right answers, but about asking the right questions. So as a business manager, if you're able to ask the right questions of your team, of yourself, of your IT departments, of everybody else, the right answers will be found eventually.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Any other queries, please? All right. So we'll stop here for the day, sir. Thank you so much.
Yes.
It was a very
Thank you very much.
insightful, enlightening presentation. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. Right. Good day.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Thank
much,
you
sir.
all. Thank you
Thank
all.
you very much. It was very enlightening.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.